Welcome everyone to the May Friends of Indian Art event. I'm Ardith Eicher, the co-chair of the FIA steering committee, along with Karen Freeman. And I want to welcome you to a private tour of MIAC's brand new stunning exhibit entitled Clearly Indigenous, Native Visions Reimagined in Glass. We could not have a better tour guide tonight than Leticia Chambers, the co-curator of the exhibit and the author of the accompanying book of the same name. So even if you've had a chance to see the exhibit at MIAC, you have not had the chance to hear Leticia's insights about the exhibit, the artists, and the stunning pieces represented. So without further ado, welcome to Clearly Indigenous. Take it away, Lauren.
Clearly Indigenous, Native Visions Reimagined in Glass is the name of an exhibit at the Museum of Indian Art and Culture in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We are at the museum today and will tour this new exhibit. It's also the title of a book that accompanies the exhibit. The book is not a catalog, though, because it tells its own story. The book tells the story of how glass art came to Indian country. It begins when the Institute of American Indian Arts, a high school for the arts in Santa Fe, was looking to become a college. And they partnered with the Rhode Island School of Design to develop an accredited college curriculum. At that time, Dale Chihuly, one of the proponents and leading practitioners in the new glass arts movement, was on the faculty at the Rhode Island School of Design, or RISD, as it's known to people. Chihuly came to Santa Fe, built a hot shop, taught a glass course, and the effort began to introduce Native students to glass art. I'm Leticia Chambers. I'm the author of the book, and I also curated the exhibit along with Kathy Short, a Santa Fe artist and arts consultant. The book is very interesting in that it not only tells how glass art came to Indian country and how two movements came together, the contemporary Native arts movement and the glass arts movement in 1974 when Chihuly came to Santa Fe, but it also focuses on all of the Native artists who are currently working in glass, and it tells their stories. It's an interesting book that stands on its own and is not organized in the same way as the exhibit. The exhibit, which we're going to see now, is organized around the intellectual content of the objects themselves, the glass objects. And that leads to a fuller understanding of how traditional Native arts have influenced and become the subject matter for glass arts in Indian country. We're going to start with a case of objects that were created by Dale Chihuly. Now, he's non-Native, but we've included him in this Native exhibit because not only did he influence most Native artists working in glass, but he himself was influenced in turn by Native art. When Chihuly returned to RISD, he did a series of cylinders. It was his very first series, and it was cylinders that had designs of Navajo weavings that he had been exposed to while he was in the Southwest. He also, shortly after, did a series of baskets. He had been particularly influenced by seeing Salish baskets made of natural fibers, and he loved their undulating shapes, and he tried to recreate that shape in glass. And his very first baskets were very dull in color, like the natural fiberglass baskets of the Salish basket makers. But later he became known for his many basket series in bright colors. In addition to starting the glass program at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, Dale Chihuly also was a co-founder of a glass school in Washington State called Pilchuck Glass School. And many of the artists who live and work in the Pacific Northwest have studied glass art at Pilchuck. And several of the artists in this case have studied with or worked with Chihuly directly. I want to start with Dan Friday, whose baskets are really of a beautiful technical design. He creates baskets that have a look, a crisscross look, like the baskets that were made of fibers by the traditional basket weavers from Salish and Tlingit tribes and other tribes of the Pacific Northwest. And to do that, he puts a bundle of glass rods of varying colors together, puts them in the glory hole to melt them, then puts it on his blowpipe and blows a basket, and he gets a crisscross shape that's just amazing. His baskets are dedicated, some of them, to a woman that lived near his family at Lumi called Aunt Fran. And the basket that you're seeing is called Aunt Fran's basket. And it's in glass, but clearly has the shape and look of a fiber basket. Dan Friday's sister, Rhea Friday, is also a glass blower, and she does very delicate, lacy-looking baskets. We also have baskets made by an artist, Hala Oldpeter, who is a well-known fiber artist making baskets, as do her mother and grandmother. But she recently started working in glass, and she told me that the glass was so rewarding to work with because rather than having to spend the time collecting the fibers, working with the fiber to make it possible to weave with it, she blew the glass and she loved it. So the pieces, we have several baskets by Hala Oldpeter on view in this case. We also have some Sally bags that were made by Lillian Pitt, and these pieces are shaped like a Sally bag that is a bag for collecting natural fibers and foodstuffs. We'll talk more about Lillian Pitt in a minute, but I want to also call your attention to a bowl by Preston Singletary that has the image of a frog on it. Preston is one of the more famous American Indian artists and has been working in glass since the 1980s. Also in the Northwest Coast, woods are very available, and so you see a lot of wood carving in the Northwest Coast. Alano Adzurza, who's Talton from a First Nations tribe, created a glass box. This box is called Sea Monster Box, and it is cast glass as opposed to blown glass, which the other baskets in this case have all been blown. Whereas Northwest Coast tribes made their utilitarian baskets and other vessels out of fibers, out of grasses and things that grow and wood, the tribes of the Southwest, particularly the Pueblo tribes of New Mexico, have made pottery for millennia. And as the glass artist in the Pacific Northwest turned to glass that resembles baskets, the glass artists of the Southwest, the Pueblo artists, have created pots in glass. And we have some beautiful examples here of some pottery in glass. One of the very first artists to blow glass was Tony Hahola. And you'll see some vessels by Tony that also show a silver stamp. And his grandfather had been a silver artist, a silversmith, and he left his tools to Tony. And so Tony, in honor of his grandfather, puts that stamp on some of his pots. He also has blown some beautiful pots that are widely collected. Pueblo pottery is very recognizable, and the wedding vase is a Pueblo pot that is highly collected. Ira Lujan, a glass artist, has created a Pueblo pot, a Pueblo wedding vase with a twist by creating a break in the vase. This blown glass vase is whimsical in my view. Other artists have also created vessels. Ransom Lomatawama, who's Hopi, has created vessels as well as spirit figures, which we'll see in a later case. Several of the Pueblo artists that work in glass have glass as their primary medium, and certainly Robert Spooner Marcus would fit into that category. His grandmother was a well-known potter, and he actually experimented some with pottery, but he started blowing glass very early. And this blood moon moth that you see has a beautiful coloring. He also has said that it's not the piece that he makes that he loves, but it's the process of making it. And so he's constantly experimenting. And one piece that you're seeing is his effort to create a piece in glass that looks like it was put together from shards. He had seen a pot that had been recreated after an archaeological dig. And so he experimented to get that same look of shards by painting over a blown glass vessel. The pieces that you're seeing now are by Harlan Rieno, and in a collaboration with Preston Singletary. And whereas Tony and Spooner Marcus and Ira and Ransom do their own glass blowing, there are several Pueblo artists who collaborate with Preston Singletary, where Preston blows the pieces to the dimensions and design of the Pueblo artist, and then the Pueblo artist carves or adds other features to the glass. And these by Harlan Rieno are a collaboration with Preston Singletary. I also want to show you the pieces that are by Tammy Garcia. And Tammy is a very well-known Pueblo artist. Her Santa Clara black on black pottery is very well known, and she has created in glass, in collaboration with Preston, the most incredible glass piece. Preston blew it and Tammy did the carving. We also have in this case the most beautiful green bowl, and also a red bowl that has a butterfly on it, and a cylinder. And this cylinder is her version of cylinders that were found in archaeological digs that had chocolate residue in them. So they were obviously used to drink chocolate, which of course was a native plant of the Americas and enjoyed by the Pueblos as well as the South American tribes where it was grown and traded. There was extensive trade between the tribes of the Americas, both North and Central and South America. While glass is a new medium for American Indian artists, most of the glass art made by Native artists includes images from cultural heritage. And I want to call your attention here to Grandmother's Legacy series, which are two designs of Indian or of Navajo rugs that were made by Carol Lujan's grandmother, and she has recreated those designs in glass. Native peoples of the Americas have a great, profound respect for nature and view nature as an integrated whole. They love the animals and treat them with respect, whether they're sea creatures or animals of the land or animals of the sky. We have divided these sections into the types of animals that these artists have blown or carved in glass. The case you're going to see now primarily has pieces by Raven Sky River, a Tlingit artist who grew up on Lopez Island in Washington State. He uses a very difficult process. He blows these large sea creatures, and then he carves them in what's called an offhand carving process. The animals that you're going to see now include a seahorse, a wonderful turtle that technically is just incredible. There's also an orca, which we'll also see again from the other side. And you'll notice that this case can be viewed from two sides because these animals need to be seen in their entirety. There's also a beautiful salmon fish by Dan Friday in this case. We've now moved to the other side of this case. I love seeing these sea creatures suspended as if they're swimming in the ocean or an aquarium. I want to call your attention to Mother, a whale and her calf, also by Raven Sky River. This is a beautiful piece, as is the collaborative piece next to it, which is a seal. Continuing in the sea creature theme, we have here an orca and her baby, her calf. This piece was a prototype for a very large piece that Marvin Oliver, the artist, did to hang in an atrium at the Children's Hospital in Seattle. And to make this piece, he put different colors of glass together and fused them, and then floated them in a steel frame. Pieces in this case include a trap, a fish trap. It was also designed by Marvin Oliver, and it was done in collaboration with Raven Sky River, who blew the fish inside the trap. Also cast in crystal is the Preston Singletary killer whale totem, a beautiful piece. Totems, of course, were very important in the Pacific Northwest. The case you're seeing now shows animals of the land, and I want to call your attention first to a totem pole. It's called Forager Bear Totem. It's by Dan Friday. And what's most interesting to me about Dan Friday's totems is that both his grandfather and his great-grandfather were very famous carvers of wooden totem poles, and now he works with totem poles in glass. We also have in this case the very first animal that was ever blown by an American Indian glass blower, and that's the Larry Avicana scorpion that's sitting next to the Forager Bear totem. It's a lovely piece, and it was created in the mid-70s by Larry when he was at IAIA. Larry, I should mention, both went to IAIA and graduated from there, and then he studied glass blowing at RISD with Dale Chihuly. And sometime after that, he came back to IAIA as a professor, where he taught sculpture and glass. You'll notice the wolves on the far right of this case. They are actually a headdress and regalia for dancing. And Joe David who's Nuchalnoth, carved the same type of headdresses from wood, and then he and Preston Singletary collaborated to make these glass versions. Another collaboration with Preston Singletary is with Jody Naranjo, and she's a Pueblo potter. She makes very whimsical, fun pieces, and she's done this piece, which is called Animal Collage. And next to it is a very beautiful piece by Spooner Marcus. This piece has a turtle on it, and that's why we've featured it in this Animals of the Land. Spooner gets such beautiful coloring on his pieces. Next to it is a vessel made by Tony Hahola that if you look at closely, you'll see there is a snake around the vessel. These pieces honor the animals, and particularly the two bears that you see, one by Dan Friday and the other by Tony Hahola. And if you look closely at Tony Hahola's bear, it has a baby bear in utero. Prior to European contact, the tribes of the Americas had very advanced knowledge of the heavens, of stars, and of the movements of the planets and the sun and moon. The star maps were made by tribes to help guide them on their journeys. Also, the interest in the sky led to interest in weather patterns and elements of weather. The top piece in this case is a weather element, a lightning bolt that is cast in crystal by Tammy Garcia. The piece to the right is a Milky Way piece by Adrian Wall, and on the left is a sun by Larry Avicana. Birds also figure prominently in Native art. The raven is particularly regarded by the Northwest Coast tribes. In the Tlingit tribe, raven is known for bringing light to the people. And Preston Singletary's piece, Raven Steals the Sun, in this case is a wonderful piece. He's done a whole series featuring raven. The next piece over is called Raven Rattle. Preston is technically a wonderful glass carver and blower, and these raven pieces are stunning. There's a raven head on a piece that was done by a Maori artist in collaboration with Preston. His name is Louis Tamahana Gardner. We also have in this case another version of Raven Steals the Sun in a spindle whorl shape by Ed Archie Noiscat. And you see Raven stealing the sun. Ed Archie also did the thunderbirds that are featured in a spindle whorl shape just to the side of a bird. We also have two dragonflies featured in this case, one by Carol Lujan and one by Robert Spooner Marcus. The Carol Lujan piece started as a plaque, and she then rolled it to create a vase shape. Other birds featured are from Ira Lujan, a quail on top of a jar, and we have a small totem by Dan Friday called Watcher Totem. The piece in the back of the case is by Sean Peterson, and it is called Circling Ravens. Honoring ancestors is very important to Native peoples, and one way that Native cultures convey ancestral knowledge is through their ceremonies and ceremonial regalia. The pieces that you see at the far left of this case are actually created to represent jars from the Mississippian culture, jars that were found in a dig in the Mounds culture. This was done as a collaboration between Preston Singletary and Marcus Ammerman, who is Choctaw, which is one of the tribes that is part of the Mounds cultures. Below those, you'll see pieces by Adrian Wall, who is a carver of wood, a carver of stone, and a glass blower, and he also works in cast glass. I want to call your attention particularly to the Joe David piece. It's a mask, which is a very important part of honoring ancestors. This piece is clearly Nuchal-Nof, which is Joe's tribe, in its design. To the right of the Looks to the Sky, which is the name of the Joe David Preston Singletary collaborative piece, is a piece by Angela Babby. And she's developed a very interesting technique. She fuses pieces of glass of different colors together to create her background. And then she takes powdered glass, liquefies it, and paints on the surface as if she's painting with oils. And then once that liquid glass dries, it's very, very fragile until she bakes it in a kiln. And the piece that you're looking at is a very poignant piece. It's called Remember, Don't Forget. And Angela was looking at a black and white photo of the scene at Wounded Knee after the massacre. And as she was looking at this black and white photo, she suddenly realized that the shapes in the foreground were the bodies of women who had been killed, and they were wearing clothing. And she decided to paint that as colorful clothing in order to convey to the viewer the horror of the Wounded Knee massacre. There are 3 pieces on the bottom shelf by Lillian Pitt. The first piece is a crystal cast that's in the shape of a piece that is both a pictograph and a petroglyph. The next piece is also a cast glass piece, and then the vessel on the far right is a sally bag named Ancestors' Messages. A piece by Rory Wakemup is a ghost shirt. In warrior societies in the past, when a young man proved his bravery, not necessarily in war, but his bravery, he would be given what was called a war shirt. Then in the 1800s, after tribes felt that they were losing their cultures, a society grew up that sponsored ghost dances, and young men would be given what were called ghost shirts. Balancing between 2 worlds and the dichotomies that come from living in both a traditional Native world and a contemporary American mainstream society causes reflection and thought. And the pieces in this case I find to be very thought-provoking. For example, the portrait at the back is called Squaw Jim, and it is a reproduction, not a reproduction, but a version of a photo that Angela Babby found, and she has placed these 2 persons in front of the Supreme Court with its motto, equal justice under the law. These cases also show a piece by Joe Feddersen that is called Coyote and Robot, with coyote representing the traditional and robot also featured on the vessel representing modern life. The Corn Maiden, which is by Ransom Lomatawama, also is a traditional figure, but one that is carried forward, and we still find native tribes, particularly in this region, making corn maidens and showing corn maidens. The two pieces that are on the bottom shelf by Joe Feddersen are very different than showing the landscape of the past. But what he's tried to do is to show how modern life has changed by showing what's on a modern landscape. He has high tension wires and he shows a roadway. In this series, he also showed tire tracks. That's a very interesting take on modern life that Joe Feddersen has done. I want to call your attention to this piece by an Australian Aboriginal artist. His name is Ganambar. And what fascinated me was that he, in his work, has focused on the changes in the landscape that have been brought about by modern life. And so we have this piece by Ganambar showing a landscape, and he, living at the opposite end of the earth from Joe Feddersen, was also dealing with how has landscape changed from traditional times to modern times. Some of you may be familiar with Cochiti figures. It's a very prominent form in Cochiti, Pueblo, and there are, sometimes 2 foot tall to 3 foot tall figures of individuals with Cochiti designs. Harlan Rieno, who lives at Cochiti, Pueblo, although he was born at Santo Domingo, collaborated with Preston Singletary to create figures like the Cochiti figures that stand alone and that have, they have some traditional design, but also there's a kind of almost a Harlequin effect to the design given to these Cochiti figures recreated in glass. The piece on the lowest level is called Transporter, and it's by Marvin Oliver, who also did the orca that hangs in the Seattle hospital. This is a blown glass piece, quite a beautiful piece. And up in the upper right corner, you'll see a plaque by Carol Lujan and a figure by Ira Lujan. And they're not related, by the way. Carol is Navajo and Ira is from both Taos Pueblo and Okayawingay, although he was raised in Albuquerque. Continuing with the Bridging Two Worlds theme is this Angela Babby painting with glass called Melt, and she did it in response to her concern with climate change and her concern for the climate. Melt is really a social commentary piece, as is her the other piece that we saw in this case in front of the Supreme Court. This piece is part of the Bridging Two Worlds concept, and it was created by Joe Feddersen using both petroglyphs and other iconography from the past, as well as some pop culture iconography. You can see a peace sign, you can see a bicycle, and you can see petroglyphs in this. So it is a discussion between past and present. But it also echoes in that you see behind the glass pieces their shadows. Joe Feddersen came here to install this about 10 days ago, and it's a wonderful, wonderful piece that really demonstrates the concept of bridging two worlds. This is our history room, but it starts with blown up photos of a hot shop. You can almost feel the heat coming from these fires. The hot shop is where blown glass is created, and also there'll be kilns and kneeling ovens in a hot shop to finish off pieces. So it's a lot of equipment, and it's very specialized equipment. We also have in this room a history section, which includes some photos of Chihuly's time at IAIA. It includes Larry Abakana being featured, and has some pots that were made in the early days at IAIA, and also has some pieces from a school that was started in Taos. Chihuly supported the school financially, and Tony Hahola taught at the school. Clearly Indigenous, the book, features a cover by Robert Spooner Marcus, a beautiful blue cover with some native design on it in silver. The book tells the story in much greater detail than you see it in the exhibit, because it tells the story of each piece, it tells the story of the artist. The exhibit is so stunning, and it is the overall impact of the exhibit as it is displayed that really captures your imagination. But it is the book that gives you more information and helps you understand the whole story. Native artists are storytellers in glass, and I want to thank all of those who contributed to this exhibit and to the book to make it possible for the public to see these wonderful, wonderful pieces of art. The artists, many of them have loaned their works, and we have collectors who have loaned works. You know, it's not easy for a collector to part with a piece for a year or 2 years to be in an exhibit, and we certainly appreciate the many collectors who gave pieces, the artist, and also the sponsors who have made it possible.
Great. Thank you, Leticia. What a fantastic tour. I hope everyone enjoyed that. So a couple of questions came in as we were watching. So one of our first questions was, Leticia, you subtitled the exhibit Native Visions Reimagined in Glass. And when you think about a glass basket versus a fiber basket, or a glass pot versus a clay pot, what do you think are sort of the most important properties of glass that gives new expression to these kinds of vessels? Is it the colors? Is it the translucency? Is it all of that? What stands out most to you?
Well, I think it is the colors and the greater depth of color and the luminosity that can be achieved in glass. For instance, the green glass basket that you saw that was loaned by the Bucksbaums, who I see are on the call, that has a depth of color and luminosity that you simply can't achieve with clay pottery. So I think the beauty of the glass pieces is related to those properties.
And what sort of sparked your personal interest in glass? Has this been a long-standing interest, or you felt it was sort of an underrepresented area that people hadn't seen enough of? Or
You know, I was very close friends with Lloyd Keevaneu, who was one of the founders of IAIA, and he was president of IAIA when Dale Chihuly came and built the hot shop. And Lloyd had told me the story, and he always said, somebody needs to tell this story. And I always thought, yes, somebody should. And then at some point I thought, well, you know, this story may not get told if I don't tell it. So, and I am interested in glass and have been. The first piece of glass art, I don't have many pieces, but the first piece that I bought was a piece that that Preston Singletary gave for an IAIA auction. And it is a really interesting story in that not only did these two movements come together and create what is really its own genre, this genre of native glass art, but it is being practiced more and more by native artists. There are 29 native artists in the exhibit. There are and Chihuly makes 30. And then Preston has, Singletary did some collaborations with two Australian Aboriginal artists. You saw the one piece by Ganambar. There was another piece that got cut from the film. I went through most of the pieces, but the film was too long, so the man who made the film had to cut it down. So some of the artists got cut out. But there was a wonderful bird piece that looks like a bark painting by an Australian Aboriginal artist. And then there were two Maori artists included who had gone to a workshop at Evergreen College, where Dan Friday worked with, and his sister Rhea also worked with some of the artists. And I included these four Pacific Rim artists to show that this movement is enlarging beyond American Indian artists to other Indigenous artists who are creating glass art that honors their traditional designs and cultures in this medium of glass art that is, while glass is old, glass art of this nature is relatively new in the whole scheme of things.
Speaking of Preston, he seemed like a very, very busy guy in this exhibit, both his own pieces and all the collaborations he's done. And one of the questions was, there were so many collaborations in the exhibit. Is that common amongst non-native glass artists, or do you think it's indicative that native artists are more willing to work together?
Well, I think it's both. Glass is a very collaborative art, and in order to create the pieces, it often takes several people. I mean, imagine like those heavy, large pieces that Raven Sky River has made. You almost have to have a small army of people to pull that together. Smaller pieces like the little spirit figures that Ramsam Lomatuama
has done. One can do alone, probably in the hot shop, but others require help, whether it's a native art piece or a non-native piece. But in addition to that, I think the native artists have been much more collaborative and do tend to work together. An example of this is Rhea Friday was in town to last week to install a piece that she did, a very large cast glass piece that was too large for this exhibit, but has gone in to an exhibit that will open soon at the Botanical Garden. And Spooner Marcus came right over to help her install, and also Patrick Morrissey, who's non-native, but who is the proprietor of Prairie Dog Glass. So they're very helpful to each other. They promote each other. They work together. They inspire each other. And I do think there is probably more collaboration among native glass artists than one would see in other populations. But all glass artists tend to collaborate because of the nature of working with glass.
Do you feel like Preston felt like he has learned things from Tammy Garcia or Jody Naranjo or the artists he's worked with?
Yes.
Obviously, they learned glass from him, but what does he learn?
Preston and I had a long conversation about the fact that he has learned so much about other tribes and other Indian cultures by working with other artists who are from different tribes. And he's been very generous with his time in working with others. Dan Friday has also done quite a bit of collaboration, and he's the one who introduced Lillian Pitt to glass art, and the blown pieces that Lillian has, she has done in collaboration with Dan Friday.
Someone asked, like on the, let's say on the Tammy Preston piece, technically, how is the carving actually done on a piece like that?
Well, the carving would be done while it's still hot, and some of the pieces are not carved. They're actually like stencils that are applied to the piece, and some are carved. And sometimes just the design is carved in, but like in the case of Raven Sky River, the object itself is carved. So he'd blow the piece, and then he would literally, with his hands and gloves, carve onto the piece to create the shape of the object.
Okay. And I think Joanne wanted to know how many pieces are actually in the exhibit and how long will it be up?
Okay, I'm not quite sure of the final count, and there are two pieces that will be added to the exhibit that actually had to have a little conservation done when they arrived, and so they're not added yet. But there's around 140 pieces, and it depends on how you. We had quite a few photos in the exhibit as well. There was one group of photos that was shown that was of artists collaborating. That goes back to the question we just talked about, how the artists like to work together. The exhibit will be up until June 22nd of 2022. And there is a chance that the exhibit will travel. It was not planned as a traveling exhibit, but in fact, there have been expressions from other museums that are interested in receiving it. That started happening as soon as the book came out, and some people saw the book and started talking about wanting to have it in their community. So we'll see whether that happens or not.
That's a nice compliment.
It is nice. And one of the museums that's very interested is the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, which is a really fine museum. I just happened to have been there a couple of years ago, so I was very pleased about that.
there was a statement in your book. I actually was studying your book this week. You said native glass art is often notable for its advocacy role. And you did talk about that a little bit in the tour and some of the sort of social commentary and some of the pieces. But do you think the glass artists have been sort of more vocal in some of their statements than maybe some other art forms, maybe because it's a more contemporary art form, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think that that many Native artists are in fact interested in social justice issues, and you do see social commentary in their pieces. I think that's true of many non-Native artists as well. But it's particularly poignant, I think, in the work that Rory Erler-Wakemup has done, and Angela Babby and Joe Feddersen.
Great. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. If you haven't already, please be sure to get up to Myac to see the exhibit in person, because the video really does not capture how impactful and beautiful it is. And then just a brief announcement that our next FIA event will take place on June 17th at 5:30. I don't think we've issued that date before, but we will obviously be following up with emails. But June 17th at 5:30. And that is featuring Nakona Burgess, who is not only an artist that many of you are familiar with, but he has been leading the effort to create Native-focused curricula in the Santa Fe public schools. That's his day job now. So we're going to hear more about how he's thinking about that, what he's doing in the Santa Fe public schools for both Native students and non-Native students, to make everyone sort of more aware of the Native point of view in school curricula. So that's it. Unless anyone else has anything to add, we will close up. Leticia, thank you so much for both taking the time to do the tour in the first place. That was a sort of a grinding video assignment. We were there all afternoon, and also for taking the time to answer everyone's questions tonight. And I also just wanted to make one other comment. The piece by Joe Feddersen, that's Bridging Two Worlds, with all the hanging pieces with the shadows behind it. Unfortunately, we just could not capture that very well on the video. It is so much more stunning in real life. So just wanted to mention that that's really worth seeing all by itself, even and then, you know, the whole exhibit is fantastic. Karen, any other comments from you?
Let me just say it's been a pleasure to be with you, and I hope you all get a chance to see the exhibit.
Thank you so much. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.